They came with the mist and left only fire behind. 5. Originating from Scandinavia in the late 8th century. 4. Feared for their swift longships and sudden coastal raids. 3. Skilled traders and explorers who reached as far as North America. 2. Fierce warriors bound by honor, fate, and the Norse gods. 1. Their legacy shaped kingdoms, languages, and legends across Europe. The Vikings were more than raiders. They were builders of a world that still echoes today. When you think of the Vikings, what kind of image pops into your head? Perhaps a fearsome warrior with an axe raised high, ready to cleave your skull clean in two. Or maybe a pillaging horde running rampant through a village, stealing everything they can carry and burning the rest. These images have become synonymous with the Viking Age and are so ingrained in our culture that it's easy to forget that these people were real individuals with rich traditions and values. But perhaps even more surprisingly, they weren't all Nordic. In fact, the Vikings hailed from a region we now call Scandinavia, which includes modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, but also parts of northern Germany, eastern Finland, and even the Kola Peninsula of northwest Russia. It was here in the late 8th century that small communities started banding together to take advantage of new ships that could carry them farther than any boat ever had before. These vessels allowed the Vikings to sail not only across the Baltic Sea and the North Sea to raid and trade along the coasts of England, France, and Ireland, but even across the Atlantic Ocean to the shores of North America. But how did these peoples go from small-scale raiders to shaping the course of European history? Let's find out. Raiders of the North. Before we get too deep into the rise of the Vikings, it's important to establish one thing. This isn't a video about Norse mythology. We'll be saving that for another time. Instead, we're going to focus on the real Vikings, the ones that walked this earth between roughly the 8th and 11th centuries. The Viking Age is generally considered to have begun in 793 AD, when a group of Vikings raided the monastery at Lindisfarne in northern England. And since they didn't have any fancy armor or weapons that would require blacksmithing, they were probably using tools like axes, knives, and swords that they already used while hunting. If that sounds simple, it's because it was. The early Vikings were opportunistic hunters and gatherers, relying on what the land provided, whether that be food or weapons. During the winter months, when the seas froze over and hunting was impossible, the Vikings lived off the food they'd gathered and stored during the warmer seasons. And what they didn't eat, they traded with other European kingdoms for goods they couldn't get back home, like the famed Byzantine Empire, where they traded for silver and gold. However, as the centuries passed, the Vikings became less reliant on trading and gathering and more reliant on pillaging. As the Viking population grew and living conditions got tougher, so did the Vikings. Groups of up to 500 men led by chieftains or kings would set sail in the summer months and surprise coastal settlements. With their swift longships, they'd plunder whatever they could, then run away before any organized defense could stop them. The Vikings preferred to steal rather than kill, though, so as long as you gave them what they wanted, they wouldn't hurt you. Sometimes they took prisoners anyway, but that wasn't always a bad thing. In fact, if you were captured by the Vikings, you might end up adopted into the tribe, especially if you were female. Women were generally seen as property in Viking society and were often exchanged as gifts or taken as prizes after a successful raid. Explorers and traders. As we mentioned earlier, the Vikings didn't just raid and pillage. In fact, there were excellent traders and merchants who established trade routes all over Europe and beyond. Without the Vikings, many European kingdoms might not have been able to acquire certain luxury items, like walrus ivory from the north or exotic spices and silks from the Byzantine Empire. But the Vikings didn't just bring back exotic goods. They brought back ideas as well. While traveling around Europe, the Vikings picked up knowledge of different cultures and technologies and brought them back home. This helped usher in what some scholars call the Viking Renaissance, where Scandinavian culture flourished and innovation boomed. Viking explorers also traveled across the Atlantic to North America around 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The first recorded voyage to the New World was in 9999 when a Viking named Bjorn Herjulfsson landed in Newfoundland, Canada, and built a settlement called Vinland. There's evidence that they explored as far south as Massachusetts and even fought battles with the natives, whom they called Skraelings. But the settlements never lasted, likely due to conflict with the natives and the harsh climate. Still, it's safe to say that if the Vikings had stuck it out in North America, the history of the continent would be drastically different. But their ambitions didn't stop there. Viking explorers even made it to the Middle East, with some reaching as far as the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. There, some converted to Christianity and became fierce fighters in the Byzantine army. Others returned home and helped spread the religion throughout Scandinavia. Though the majority of Vikings remained loyal to the old gods, worshipping deities like Thor, Odin, and Loki. These beliefs shaped the Vikings' entire worldview, influencing their art, literature, daily lives, and of course their values. In Viking society, bravery and strength were highly valued, as was loyalty to one's kin and respect for the natural world. This respect is perhaps best exemplified in their treatment of the dead. The Vikings believed that when someone died, their soul went on a journey to the afterlife. To help the soul on its way, the Vikings buried their dead with feasts, weapons, and valuables. They also built large burial mounds over their graves, which served as both a place of remembrance and a testament to the deceased's importance. Many of these burial mounds can still be seen across Scandinavia today, bearing witness to a culture that is gone but not forgotten. Warriors of the North. Although the Vikings were excellent traders and explorers, they will always be remembered as ferocious warriors. At the height of the Viking Age, hundreds of longships would sail out of Scandinavian ports each year, carrying warriors eager to test their strength against other European kingdoms. The Vikings weren't just fearless fighters, they were also incredibly disciplined and strategic. They trained from a young age to be warriors, learning how to wield weapons, fight in formation, and lead troops into battle. This training paid off as the Vikings went on to conquer much of Northern Europe, including England, Ireland, France, and much of Russia. Despite their military success, though, the Vikings weren't always united. In fact, they often fought each other, either over control of new lands or simply because they could. One of the most famous examples of Vikings fighting Vikings happened in 865 AD, when a Norwegian king named Halfdan Ragnarsson led his fleet to the Kattegat Strait and met up with a fleet of equal size commanded by King Gunhild of Denmark. The ensuing battle was so brutal that it became known as the Battle of the Hordas. After 5 hours of fighting, only 40 ships remained, leaving around 4,000 dead on the battlefield. Although the Vikings eventually stopped their practice of pillaging and raiding, their ferocity in battle never faded. In fact, it only grew. By the 10th century, the Vikings had established several kingdoms across Europe, including the Danelaw in England, the Kingdom of Dublin in Ireland, and the Grand Duchy of Finland in Russia. These kingdoms were ruled by kings and queens who were descended from the original Viking raiders, many of whom converted to Christianity, but still held on to their warrior traditions. Today, their legacy lives on in the countries of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, as well as in the cultures of places like Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. Even though the Viking Age ended over 1,000 years ago, the impact these seafaring raiders had on the world is still felt today. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to stay updated. And as always, thanks for watching.